A very good evening to everyone. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So, at the outset, I wanted to clarify on two things. One, that I'll be continuing with the previous way of teaching through my iPad, and secondly, many of you had issues regarding the voice quality. So, for that, after the lockdown has been now released, I have already ordered a microphone which is scheduled to be delivered around June 1st or 2nd. So please bear with the voice quality till then. So with this, let's start the day with the personality of the day. There was an editorial in the Hindu, and I have taken that itself as a personality of the day. It was about Jacinda Ardern, who is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and the article was entirely about her. So the article says that being the Prime Minister of New Zealand, she is extremely popular. She was the first woman leader in the history who actually gave birth in office, and she literally brings her baby to work. That is, she brings her baby to Parliament even during the sessions. She feeds the baby, but then she continues to work in the government and also participate in the parliamentary sessions. And also, after the Christchurch attacks, she came out and she spoke to the minorities and assured them that the government is with them and there is nothing to worry. And also, even in the recent COVID crisis, the manner in which she has handled the crisis is excellent. She had imposed the lockdown early enough, and then therefore, because of this, New Zealand has had just 21 deaths from the virus, and also the number of new cases have now fallen to very negligible levels. Also, even during this crisis, she has displayed her leadership capabilities, and she has spoken to the people time and again, and she has kept that channels of communication open with the people. She had answered the people's questions, the questions from the press, showing that she is an excellent leader. So what this whole thing shows about her is that women can definitely excel in whatever field they are. Given that, especially in India, the representation of women in the parliament is less than 12%. So this shows women can be good political leaders as well. And also, in spite of having the baby, in spite of being a nursing mother, she did not give any excuses. Rather, she led the country from the front. So this shows her determination and will to do it and not give any excuses. So with this story, now we'll start with the first topic of the day, which is regarding defamation. So why the topic is in news is because the Madras High Court had given a ruling saying that the public servants should not misuse the defamation law. What the Madras High Court says is that several times these public servants and the constitutional functionaries, they institute defamation in the cases in the courts against particularly the media houses or against some political opponents. So the High Court has said that public servants should not misuse the defamation law for these purposes. So now we will use this as the backdrop and then try to analyze everything about defamation, like what it is, what is the origin, and is criminal defamation needed in India. All that we will see. So what is criminal defamation? First of all, it is defined in sections 499 and 500 of the Indian Penal Code. So this is the first thing you have to remember. And in 499, it gives the definition of defamation, and 500 gives the punishment which is being prescribed. So in the definition, it just says that any words that is spoken or written or any visual representation which has the effect of harming the reputation of a person. So that is defamation. And under punishment, so whenever any proceedings happen under this and a person is convicted, then he will have a jail term of up to 2 years or a fine, or it can be both. So this is the punishment and this is the definition under 499 and 500 of the IPC. So now to see why a criminal offense. So there we will now see the arguments in favor why defamation should be a criminal offense. The first thing is that what the government has given as an argument that why it wants to retain defamation as a criminal offense, that is a liquidity. Suppose if defamation is made just a civil offense, which means the offender will have to pay the fine or the compensation. But people in India don't have that much amount of liquidity that whenever they are acquitted, whenever they are convicted, they will be able to pay that compensation. They won't have that much money with them. So this liquidity crunch at the hands of the people to be able to pay the fine is the reason why we must make it criminal. So this is the argument that is given by the government, is a liquidity issue with the people. The second thing is that the state has a compelling interest. So this compelling interest doctrine says that the state has a compelling interest to protect the right to dignity and good reputation to its citizens. So this is a duty of the state to protect the dignity and respect of the citizens. So that is why also it is very important that defamation is made a criminal offense. The third reason why it should be made so is that is because of the reason of online defamation. So the online platforms are increasing day by day, and therefore, and also censorship through over the internet has become extremely difficult. So online defamation can be adequately countered only if there is a good amount of deterrence that can come by making defamation as a criminal offense. The fourth reason is that when you look at sections 499, you already see that there are a number of exceptions, in fact. So section 499 says that there will be several exceptions that have been exempted from the ambit of speech. So something that is extremely truthful and not intended to be to defame somebody, but rather whatever is being told is the truth. Then some statement that is made in the good faith, or some statement that is made for the public good, all these are exempted from section 499. So there are already exceptions. So even after that, if some case is falling under the defamation, it means that it definitely has caused an irreparable damage to somebody's dignity and respect, and therefore it has to be made a criminal offense for that amount of deterrence. So now we have seen the reasons why it should be a criminal offense. Let's see the arguments why we need to decriminalize defamation. The first thing is that definitely it will affect our rights under Article 19(1) regarding the freedom of speech and expression. So that is a fundamental right, and defamation, if it is made a criminal offense, then people will be extremely scared to be able to express themselves freely. So that is the first thing. Second thing is our commitment with the international laws. So for instance, India is a signatory to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So this again says that there has to be freedom of expression and freedom of speech. So by making defamation a criminal offense, this is definitely going to be heard. So even the Human Rights Committee of this particular international covenant has called upon the states across the world to abolish criminal defamation, because that intimidates the citizens, and then they will shy away from exposing anything that is going on wrong in front of them. So people will shy to expose because they fear that they may later on be framed under defamation. So this is the second reason. The third reason is the harassment of the people. So imagine if anybody is any court cases, any cases filed against a person for defaming, so then that person will have to go to the courts, face the courts, and appear for various hearings, the preliminary examinations and all that. This will truly be a harassment. And also many times what is usually done is cases are filed in different courts of different states. So the alleged defamer will have to run from pillar to post, run from one state to another, run from one court to another, and then attend the hearings. So this really amounts to harassment of the people. So that is why again there is a need to decriminalize defamation. The next reason is that it actually aids self-censorship. So because, and also self-restraint. See why? Because if we even look at the recent Madras High Court judgment, it has told that the public servants and the other constitutional functionaries should not misuse this law by slapping cases against the media houses, against the journalists, and against political opponents. So this is what is happening. So when defamation cases are filed on the media houses, it will lead to a kind of self-censorship where the media houses don't want to report the true happenings in the country. So this is again one thing that will be the case. So because of this, again, we should decriminalize defamation. So the next reason is that whenever any person is defamed, then it is actually his it's a private harm that is being done. When we call something as a crime, so crime is usually against the society. So we call rape a crime because it will shake the conscience of the society. So it is usually against the society, something that is made criminal. But when somebody is being defamed, it is a private harm. So if we have the basic understanding of the private harm versus something that is against the society, then defamation cannot fall under the definition of crime. So that is again another reason why it should be decriminalized. So now we have also seen the reasons why defamation needs to be decriminalized. Now let us see what has been the court's opinion in this regard. So once you will definitely quote the recent Madras High Court judgment. Even before Supreme Court in Subramanian Swamy case. So in that case also, Supreme Court actually did not tell that criminal defamation was unconstitutional. So Supreme Court did not tell that, but what rather Supreme Court told is that definitely there has to be some restraints when it comes to invoking criminal defamation. But Supreme Court held that right to have a dignified life is a right under Article 21. So Article 21 includes the right to be treated in a dignified manner. So therefore, even in another case before, I think it's a Kiran Bedi case, where the court had held that reputation to an individual is like the hands and limbs of the person. So a person without hands and limbs will he will lose the value of life. So in similar way, a person without reputation is again a lot of harm that is caused to the person. So therefore, it must be treated that severely. So court has held that under Article 21 comes dignity. So respecting the dignity of every individual is a responsibility of the state. While on the one hand you have the Article 21, which talks about the right to dignity, and then we have Article 19, which is the right to free speech. So when these two rights are definitely in some kind of a conflict, but however, the right to dignity of a person cannot be crucified at the altar of protecting the freedom of speech of a person. So this is what the court has held in the Subramanian Swamy case. This was about the judiciary opinion. So when you have to write the conclusion, you can write it that if you look at the origins of the defamation, it was in the courts of Henry VIII, and that was mainly because it was used as a means of punishing disrespect against authority. But now governments across the world, they are more people-centric. We talk of ethical governance, in which constructive criticism from the people is extremely important. And yesterday also we already saw that Supreme Court had told that it actually acts like a safety valve. Dissent acts like a safety valve. So therefore, there has to be some amount of tolerance, and the public servants and the constitutional functionaries should not misuse this. So for this, what has to be done? So for this, conclusion should be such that we are trying to balance the two different things. So one, the Supreme Court itself has held that criminal defamation is constitutional. So if we are having criminal defamation, we must ensure that it is not being misused by the public servants. So for that, the first thing which can be done is, whenever somebody feels that he or she has been defamed, then it has to be noted that this loss of reputation is very serious, and the proof for that must also be substantial. So the loss of reputation should be serious, and the proof for that must also be substantial. That's the first thing. And also the complainant must demonstrate that there is a material injury that is caused to the reputation. So the next requirement is a material injury being caused to the reputation of the person as a direct result of someone's statement. So this is one thing. However, we can also many times see that several frivolous cases are being filed for defamation. So in this case, the courts must also be empowered so that they can give some exemplary punishments where frivolous suits have been filed and the time of the court has been wasted. So for that also, exemplary punishment has to be made for any frivolous case that is filed. So this you can write as a part of the way forward. So now with this, we will move on to the next topic, which is a double disaster. So this spoke about the cyclone that has now made a landfall in Odisha and West Bengal, Umphan. So in the whole article, what I felt one thing that was important was it spoke about some prefabricated houses as a solution to these disasters, because there will be large scale destruction of houses and properties. So these prefab facilities can be provided as safe shelter. So with this, I had recently read a case study, so I remembered that and thought that was very interesting to share. So one architecture graduate from University of Hawaii, and his name is Joey Valenti. So this University of Hawaii architecture graduate had designed a prefabricated low-cost housing units, and these housing units were made entirely from an invasive species of trees that is called as albizia trees. So now what is the good thing about this is, first, this is used as affordable housing units. In the Honolulu, the affordable housing shortage was extreme. So when these prefab houses were made from these invasive trees, first it provided a solution to the affordable housing shortage which was prevalent in the state. So even in India, we are talking about affordable housing by 2022, but again there are definitely so much of shortage when it comes to affordable housing. So these prefabricated houses offer a very innovative and low cost solution to such affordable housing. Second thing is, the prefab houses were made entirely from an invasive tree species of albizia. So this shows how what is actually a bane for you can be utilized and turned into something that is good for the society. So it was found that these albizia trees were very water thirsty and they were taking up a lot of water, and this was depriving the local vegetation of water. So this was basically destroying the native local forests. So this also helped in restoring the native forests because these invasive tree species were used. So this shows how the locally available materials which otherwise we don't even use for anything, that can be used to make something like this, which can offer very important solutions to some of the important problems that the country is facing. So such unique interesting methods can be applicable even in India, because we too face the same types of problems. So with this, to the next topic, which is violation of right found but no remedy given. So this article was basically talking about the order which the executive order which had prohibited the 4G internet in Jammu and Kashmir, because the reasoning was that the availability of high speed internet is being misused by the terror elements to plan for terror attacks in the Indian soil. But however, the broader lesson to learn from this is regarding the fundamental rights. So there is this maxim which says that whenever there is a right, then there is a remedy. So even our Constituent Assembly was guided by this maxim, and that is why after giving fundamental rights prescribed in the Part 3, the Constitution makers also gave Article 32, which says that whenever there is any violation of the fundamental rights, then the Supreme Court has the original jurisdiction. So if my fundamental rights are violated, I can go straight to the Supreme Court and say that my rights have been violated, and I can get my grievances redressed. So this is so Article 32 says that the Supreme Court has the authority to issue writs and thereby remedy the enforcement of fundamental rights that have been guaranteed by the Constitution. Also, even during the several years of after independence, there have been an expansion in what these rights include also. So for instance, earlier fundamental rights under Article 21 just meant that right to life, but now this has been expanded to mean the right to clean air, it is expanded to mean the right to health, right to shelter also, right to basic human dignity also, and now right to privacy also. So there has been an expansion in what rights have meant to the courts and what rights have meant to us. So first of all, there is a fundamental rights which have been provided, and then under Article 32, we have the right to go approach the Supreme Court directly for remedying any violation in the fundamental rights. And third, there has also been an expansion in the fundamental rights. So now in all these cases, however, we see that several times there is a conflict between two rights. So what has happened in the Foundation for Media Professionals versus the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. So this was the case in which the Supreme Court considered the constitutionality of the order which had reduced the internet speeds in the Jammu and Kashmir. So the internet speeds were limited at the 2G speeds in the Jammu and Kashmir. So this issue was in front of the court. So what the Supreme Court told in this case was, on the one hand is the right to free speech, right to have the internet. Now why right to have the internet is very important is because with this right comes the right to free speech, because several people they express their opinions and concerns over the social media. With this again the right to undertake businesses, because it was a time of the lockdown and many people were conducting their businesses through their social media accounts and other online medium. So there are other rights which are associated with this. So Supreme Court held that on the one hand is this right, and on the other hand is the national security. So as the government argument was that if good internet speeds are available at the 4G speeds, then this internet, high speed internet, will be misused by the terrorists to plan for terrorist attacks in the Indian soil. So the Supreme Court was faced with this dilemma that on the one hand is the right and on the other hand is the national security. So if this right is violated, accordingly there must have been a remedy. But then there is also this very important dimension of national security. Then how do we balance such things? Not just in this case, there have been several cases where there has been some dilemmas regarding the enforcement of a particular right and versus some public interest. So whenever there is private right versus public interest, where do we draw the lines, or how do we ensure that the private rights are not too much sacrificed under the garb of public interest? So we need to have some checks and balances. The first is the doctrine of proportionality, which means that the first question we must ask is the restriction proportionate to what is the objective we want to achieve? So in this case, we are restricting the speed of the internet. So is it proportionate to the objective that we want to achieve, that is some peace in the region without any terror attacks? So that is the doctrine of proportionality. If there is an object that we want to achieve and the amount of restriction that is being imposed is much higher than this objective, then it is not proportionate, it is disproportionate. So the first question to ask is it proportionate? Is the restriction proportionate to the objective we want to achieve? The second one is the what is the rationale of the state? So whenever we talk of the state's rationale, so is the state's rationale based on a rigorous analysis of the facts? Is it based on some legitimate grounds? So these are the questions that we must ask while we talk about the state's rationale. What is the intention of the state behind imposing certain restrictions, or what is the intention of the state behind curbing some of the fundamental rights? The third check is the least intrusive. So whenever the state wants to curb some fundamental right or to achieve some objective, whether the same objective can be achieved using some other means also. So if one particular objective can be achieved using 2 or 3 means or more, then the question we must ask is which of these 3-4 means, which one is the least intrusive? Which one is that measure which will least curb the fundamental rights of the citizens? So this is the next question. This is a next test that must be posed. Next is a balance of competing interests. So always there will be competing interests. In this case, it is the national security on the one hand and the right to have free internet, and thereby the right to have freedom of expression and business. That is the rights which are involved. So against the rights and the public interest, there will always be some competing interests. So we need to have a balance between the two. So what is the right proportion, where the lines should be drawn? That is the next thing which we have to ask. So these are the checks and balances whenever we are faced on with this dilemma that there is a private right, but then it is being sacrificed for a larger public good. So we need to ask, follow through these 4 tests to be able to ensure that there is a balance between the two. Now with this next topic, before that, there was a small bit in this particular article which can fit in many essays or ethics answers. So what Confucius says is every government needs 3 important things. One is the weapons, next is the food, and third is the trust. So Confucius says that if there is a ruler and he cannot rule, supposing, then he will first give up his weapons. After that, he will give up his food, but the trust will prevail till the end. So even if a government is going to lose, if a government is not to rule, even then the government will give up the weapons, next government will give up the food, but the third thing, that is the trust, it will carry on forever. It won't so that this trust will be guarded by the governments till the end, and trust therefore is the most important element. Even in this week's video, we spoke about the social contract between the people and the government, and the whole basis of this social contract we're having is the trust that the people impose on their representatives. So therefore the government should do everything possible to hold this trust and remain true to this trust, that faith that the citizens have confided on them. So this you can use in essays or ethics answers. So the next article was on the role of Finance Commission. So basically the 15th Finance Commission is headed by Mr. N.K. Singh. So recently the Finance Commission had met over the video conference, and then they were discussing what will be the India's fiscal future, financial future. So in that case, the panel found that because of the uncertainty with respect to COVID, it was difficult to predict what will be the growth rate of India. So there have been wide variations in the opinions regarding the nominal GDP growth projections. So that was anywhere between -6% to 1%. So some people told there will be a negative growth, some people told there will be a 1% growth. So basically these were the wide variations. Now why I have taken this is to reflect upon the role of Finance Commission and the importance of Finance Commission. So Finance Commission being a constitutional body under Article 280 of the Constitution, you can definitely expect a question like analyze the functioning of the Finance Commission in ensuring or in promoting fiscal federalism in India. So you can have these kinds of questions. You can expect them very much. So in that case, you can use these recent things as examples to show the relevance and importance of Finance Commission. So Finance Commission has met over a video conference and it has discussed what could be the projected India's nominal GDP. And also another thing is that several times, almost always, Finance Commission cannot go to every state and itself cannot go to every state and see what is the ground realities. So it will have what are called as subcommittees. These subcommittees will do some field visits, actual surveys in the field, in the states, and then collect the necessary data, which will all then be used by the Finance Commission to make its recommendations. So while we are analyzing the functioning of the Finance Commission, in the negative side, we usually write this point that these state level field visits that are done by these subcommittees of the Finance Commission are an eyewash, and they don't really are very effective in collecting the crucial data about the fiscal performance of the states. So in this case, what has happened is the Finance Commission had a high level group on health. So the Finance Commission's high-level group on health was headed by none other than the AIIMS director itself, Randeep Guleria. So this high-level group on health has recommended a few things like we need to beef up the health infrastructure in areas which are the cluster points where the positive cases are now present. And we also need to improve the rural health infrastructure because now the migrants are returning from the cities and they have a very huge chance of being carriers of the virus. And also this high level group on health headed by the AIIMS director has also discussed the possibility of allowing the final year MBBS students to begin practicing in some areas, recognizing the immense shortage of the healthcare professionals at present. And also this high level group on health has called out that the government spending on the health sector must definitely increase from the current 0.9% of the GDP, which is the government spending. So therefore, when you're telling that if you're writing a negative side of it by telling that these subcommittees work in the actual through the field visits is not really very effective. But the positive part of that is these subcommittees can also include some of the experts like the AIIMS director and get recommendations from these experts, which can then be incorporated in the recommendations of the Finance Commission, or it helps in carrying out what has been recommended already. So this way you can highlight the positive role also. So now we'll go to the next topic, which is regarding the India-China relations. We have already seen that there have been trespasses and the standoff between the troops in Ladakh and in Pangong So region, and also in Nakula in Sikkim. So this is mainly to show you the data that how the transgressions or the incidents on the line of actual control has been on an increase. So you can just remember the total ones, and you can try to remember at least last 3 years, and you can try to plot a graph. So it was 473 in 17, and then it reduced to 404, and now it is already in 2019 it was 663. So it shows that there is an increase in the incidents that are happening on the line of actual control. So this data can be represented like this to show the increase in border tension between the two countries. We'll move to the next topic, which is online education. Online education also we have already seen in detail before what are the positives and demerits of the online education. So the reason I've included this article is an example from the Rajasthan government, which has launched the SMILE program. So SMILE program means social media interface for learning engagement. So SMILE is social media interface for learning engagement. So it is basically an e-learning plan that was launched after the lockdown was announced in the month of April by Rajasthan government. So it includes nearly 13 lakh families across the state, and they get messages through WhatsApp. So they are in part of WhatsApp groups, and they get messages through the WhatsApp groups. Also, the good part of the SMILE program is that they recognize that there are few limitations when it comes to online learning, because of the 13 lakh families who get these WhatsApp messages, only who are sent these WhatsApp messages, barely 2 lakh people actually use them. And even in those families which have the smartphones, it is usually with the man of the family who has the smartphone, and the men are usually less invested in the child's education. So these are some of the limitations which are happening. So the SMILE program is however, it is they say that it is trying and learning as and when they are proceeding. So they have weekend revision videos also, they have quizzes which are being done, and they also circulate a Google form every day where feedback is asked from the parents also. So that is one program for e-learning by Gujarat government, which is the SMILE program. And similarly, even the Delhi government has actually partnered with a tech agent, and it is starting live YouTube sessions for more than 1.6 lakh senior students in the state-run schools. So live YouTube sessions are being planned by Delhi government. So these are few good examples for online education. Next is regarding Manrega, and we have already seen in detail what Manrega is, what are all the issues, what are all the benefits. The entire critical analysis of Manrega has already been covered. So the reason I have included this article is because of one important data, which says that since the year 2012, nearly 18% of the budget allocation every year actually goes into paying the previous year's dues. So 18% of budget allocation to Manrega every year is going to paying the dues which are pending, or the pending liabilities of the previous year. So for instance, for this financial year, the pending wages and the material liabilities was nearly 16,000 crore. So this was the pending liability for the year. So now if we have an allocation of 1 lakh crore for the year 2020-21, so it means that 16 crores is going to go for the previous year dues only. So only approximately 84,000 crore will be available for employment generation for this year. So this is one issue with respect to Manrega, and therefore the allocation just amounts to 0.4 percentage of the GDP, which again is less given the demand is rising. But however, even the World Bank has recommended that for the kind of the program this is, that is the how many people are demanding this, so at least 1.7 percentage of the GDP has to be spent on this program for optimal functioning of the program. This was a recommendation of World Bank, but our outlay is just 0.47 percentage of the GDP. So this is the second issue. So these two you can write it under your earlier notes of Manrega. So this is the latest development in this. So now we will discuss yesterday's question. The question I had asked was to examine and analyze the changing dynamics in the India-Nepal relations. So when I'm asking about the changing dynamics, it is very important to understand the demand of the question. So you can even write it, for example, in the form of a tabular column, where you're saying that what was there earlier and what is the present changed dynamic. So you can comparatively write in this way also, which will provide more clarity to the examiner. Particularly if it is a 10-marker question, you can quickly draw the table and you can quickly write the answer. So it will save on time also, and it will be more effective. So in this case, some of you who are preparing for the last 1 year or so, you may not know the changing dynamics, because when I say changing dynamics, then it is basically comparing the past with the present. So, but you just have to write a broad answer, not getting into extremely specific things, because it is just a 10-marker question. But definitely you can have some categories. For instance, I'm writing earlier and what is the present dynamic, and I'm also here writing the parameter. So on what parameters I am comparing the earlier with the present. So first you can write, say, political. So in political, you can say that India has been very helpful in the political transition in Nepal in the earlier times, from monarchy to democracy. India has helped Nepal in the conduct of elections, and from that to the present changing dynamic, that we are interfering in the constitution making of Nepal, and we are interfering in the internal affairs of Nepal. This has been the transition when it comes to the political sphere. When we and also before we had the Treaty of Friendship that we signed in 1950, where we recognized each other as two sovereign independent countries. But then in the changing dynamics, we can talk of the big brother attitude of the alleged big brother attitude of India, and Nepal seeing that India is behaving like a regional hegemon. So all of these changing nature in the relations you can analyze from the political aspect point of view. The next you can take up parameter is the economic. So economic is, earlier we used to have, even now for that matter, there is free flow of goods. India is the largest source of foreign direct investment for Nepal, and Nepal being a landlocked country, it has to trade through India only, through the Kolkata port and all that. So basically for its exports and imports, it was dependent on India. And from this, the changing dynamics is that even India has reduced developmental assistance in the form of aids and loans to Nepal in the previous budgets. This developmental assistance has reduced. And also India is following the policy of self-reliance. So therefore it has also reduced the amount of imports from Nepal. And even for Nepal, earlier it was dependent entirely on India, but now even Nepal is diversifying. So it is getting assistance from China, and road links are being built to ease trade across the border. And even for India, India is announcing a number of economic development projects, like the power projects and all that, the grid connectivity and all, hydropower plants, but they are not getting implemented on time. So there is a lot of delay in the completion of these projects. So this has again led to this has not generated goodwill for us. So these are all from with respect to the economic point of view. Then you can talk about the strategic. And when it comes to strategic, you can say that earlier we had extremely close links, but now China's role in Nepal is getting is becoming more and more. For instance, China is investing in Araniko Highway, which is connecting Kathmandu to the China and Nepal border. So this is going to reduce the dependence of Nepal over India. And also, we saw yesterday how the Chinese ambassador had supported the present PM of Nepal, and the present dispensation in Nepal is kind of having a China tilt. So that is also there. The recent political map issue, because of which now Nepal is claiming certain territories, and it has released a political map, official map, which shows certain Indian territories as being part of Nepal. And even China is funding a lot of army modernization of Nepal also. It is assisting in the army modernization of Nepal. And Nepal is also a supporter of the Belt and Road Initiative of China, and it has even joined the particular initiative way back in 2017 itself. So this is the changing dynamics, that from being a total ally of India to being tilting towards China, or the increasing role that China is playing in the relation. Next, also you can talk about the people to people and cultural ties. So in this again, we have similar cultural ties because of the roots of Hinduism and Buddhism. In fact, there have always been marriages and familial ties. There was a famous saying that "Roti beti ka rishta." So that was the kind of relation we had with Nepal. So we also have, because of such cultural similarities, we have the sister cities agreement. For instance, Lumbini Bodh Gaya or Kathmandu Varanasi, and even humanitarian assistance. For whenever when earthquake happened in Nepal, we were the first to rush humanitarian assistance. But the changing dynamics part is that there has been demonetization, there is blockage of fuel supplies, some amount of discrimination. So all of these are again Nepalis getting into very poor jobs in India. So this has resulted into the changing dynamics again. So even at the multilateral fora, then the next parameter you can take is in the multilateral fora. So the changing dynamics has been that we have been a part of several multilateral fora, BBIN, BIMSTEC, SARC, NAM, etc. But the changing dynamics, you can talk about the trust deficit on part of Nepal with respect to India. So this you can talk about. But finally, when you are concluding, before conclusion, you also have got to write the good things in the changing dynamics. So basically, whatever changes are happening, these changing dynamics is a part of dynamic balancing. So today it happens to have a tilt with respect to India, tomorrow with the China, and day after again India, and after that a balance of the two. So this balancing is basically dynamic in nature. So India, on part of India, the relation with with Nepal has to be based on sovereign equality. There has to be mutual benefit, and we already have the cultural interdependence. So we have to improve upon this. And we have started so many hydropower projects, grid connectivity projects, but we have faltered on the implementation part by delaying it indefinitely. So we have to start delivering on all these things. And it is only with our soft power that we can counter the Chinese hard power. We already have the neighborhood first policy, and we must continue to give our development assistance, and we must follow the Gujarat doctrine of non-reciprocity. So we must continue to give development assistance. We can partner with Nepal in field of agriculture, in the field of Himalayan ecosystems and the river basin management, regarding power generation, and building better grid connectivity and cross-border power transmission. So on these positive lines, you have to end the answer. So next is today's question. Analyze the functioning of Finance Commission in India for 10 marks and 150 words. Try to write the answer, at least the mental frame of it. So that's it for today. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.